Okay, so this is the Bible study for Matthew chapter 26, verses 47 through 75, and that is a big chunk of this very long chapter. And I was going to break it up, but honestly, there's a lot of ties to what's going on in this whole process. And I could have probably taken the whole chapter together at once, or maybe broken it up into two instead of about three. But this is where I settled on. So bear with me. It says, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived. With him was a large crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Do what you came for, my friend." I have a footnote that says another translation might mean, "Why have you come, my friend?" But I like this translation because Jesus knew this was going to happen. Then the men stepped forward, seized Jesus, and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Put your sword back in its place," Jesus said to him, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" In that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, two came forward and declared, "This fellow said, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.'" Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so," Jesus replied. "But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look now, you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" "He is worthy of death," they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, "Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?" Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied before them all. "I don't know what you are talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to him, "I don't know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and wept bitterly. So there we go. I think you can see how this all is very closely connected as one story and can be studied together. Remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us as we study this text. Number 1 says what happened in our last study in Matthew 26:31-46. A. Jesus told his disciples that all of them would fall away that very night, and then attempted to talk to the disciples about what is going to happen after he had risen, but they were stuck on the first part. And that's true. And by the way, also, that makes this question really helpful in leading into some of the things that are said very specifically here in this text. B, all the disciples, especially Peter, vow that they will not fall away, but Jesus tells Peter he will deny him 3 times even before the rooster crows. Again, very helpful in preparing us for this text that we're studying today. C, they went to Gethsemane, and not only can't the disciples withstand the threat of death, they can't even stay awake for an hour to pray with all this approaching. None of them were as strong as they thought they were. And that's definitely a significant point. And I think I talked about that on Wednesday as well. Number 2, what happens next according to 26:47-50a? A, while he was speaking, in other words, he was still speaking and saying, can't you guys stay up with me for 1 hour? And then he says, my betrayer is coming. So while he is speaking that, B, Judas, one of the 12, arrived with a large crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. So it's interesting how every time Judas is mentioned in this section, it's one of the 12, just to remind us that it wasn't some outsider, some ungodly person, some unchristian person that denied Jesus or that betrayed Jesus. It was one of the 12. It was one of the inner circle. And we have a tendency as the church, I think, to often point the finger at those people that are doing all sorts of ungodly things outside of the church. But I'm not sure that that should be our focus. I mean, we should be talking to them about the plan of salvation, the opportunity that God has given them to come close to Jesus, to have access to God the Father. But oftentimes, the real betrayer comes from within, and we need to pay attention to our own faithfulness and what we're allowing to be a part of our lives. C, the betrayer kissed Jesus, since this was the signal they had already arranged. That's true. And then D, Jesus said, do what you came for, my friend, or what have you came for. But I think definitely it should be, I think they've done it properly here. Do what you came for. He called him friend, which probably made the knife cut even deeper in this process. Number 3, what happened next according to 26:50b through 56a. So a lot of these verses are very long and they have different segments. And so when we designate, there's no A and B. You're not going to find A and B in your Bible. But if we're talking about the first section of the verse and we want you only to read a portion, we might note A. If it starts at the end of the verse, but at sort of a beginning of a significant sentence or section within the verse, then we might say B. Occasionally, although rarely, we might say C, and we're trying to divide up the verses a little bit. But none of that's official. But if I say B and you look at that verse, I think you're going to know what I mean. A, the men with Judas stepped forward to seize Jesus, and one of Jesus' companions took out his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Now, I believe that in another gospel we learn that that's Peter. And if we know the story of Peter and his sort of impulsiveness and tendency to act without thinking, we can definitely believe it was Peter. But this particular gospel just says one of Jesus' companions. Perhaps it was Matthew trying to be gracious to Peter and not call him out for this particular um, unfortunate event. B. Jesus told the companion to put his sword away, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Or, more commonly, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. So this has become sort of a modern proverb. It wasn't a proverb, but it was in Matthew, found right here. If you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And that has come to mean that you have a choice about how you handle a situation. And if you decide to handle the situation, for instance, with violence, then violence is how people will handle it back to you. If you handle it with grace, then something different tends to come back. And so it's a warning from Jesus for the companion, but also for us, that we have a choice of how we handle these things. And one of the things I think that is significant for us, to sort of apply this to our lives, is that we can consider that Jesus did not handle things the way the world handles things. When people criticized him, when people attacked him, he did not handle them the same way the world does, and he instructed us to handle them differently. I mean, he told us, if somebody takes takes our cloak, then give to them our, I don't know, give them our pants as well, or a shirt as well, whatever it says. I probably should have looked that one up and made sure I got that one right. But he says, turn the other cheek. He says, if somebody wants you to go a mile with them, then go two. He says, you don't fight against those who are wronging you, but rather sort of be gracious, be generous to them, go beyond what they're even asking of you. And so Jesus handles things very differently. He handles conflict differently. He handles a lot of things differently, and he calls us to handle them differently as well. And the suggestion is that when we handle things differently, perhaps it will get a different kind of response from the world. Certainly, people will be confused that we are not handling them the way the rest of the world does. It will set us apart in a way that I think is needed in our world. We need people to see that there's a different way of handling what's going on. Well, I have a whole thought process on that, but I'm going to continue on. Jesus pointed out that he could ask the Father to send more than 12 legions of angels if he wanted, and he had chosen not to for some reason. So he says, look, I don't need your protection. I could call on God the Father to protect me with an army, but I haven't. So I don't need you, because I think it's always funny. I think sometimes we argue or we get angry about, sometimes apologetics or different things. If somebody's being critical of the existence of God, or we feel like we need to defend God or we need to defend his reputation. And I think this says something that sort of speaks into that, is Jesus says, I don't need your defense. I can defend myself. The Father will send protection for me if I call, but I haven't called that. Why have I not done that? Perhaps I have a different way of handling this than what your logical, worldly way of handling this is. D. Jesus says that all of this is within the will of God and fulfills Scripture. Oh, that's the reason. For some reason that he hasn't called down 12 legions of angels is because this is the call of God. This is the plan of God. This is the thing he was praying about in the Garden of Gethsemane while they were sleeping. Maybe if they had been praying, they would have had a better way of handling this and they would have understood it better. But instead, they were sleeping, and now they're responding in a very worldly way. And he says, I didn't. This is to fulfill Scripture. God has not taken this cup from him, but rather, here it is. He must fulfill God's will for his life. Jesus asked the crowd why they have come with weapons as if he were leading a rebellion. And he gives the example. We could argue, well, Peter had a sword and he cut off the guy's ear, but that was not the will of Jesus. And in fact, he says, wasn't I sitting teaching right, like within your grasp, right in the temple, right where you could have grabbed me? Why you? Well, the answer is, we know they came to grab him at night away from public eye because they didn't want to cause a riot by people that are listening to him and believe in him. Um, but what did they expect him to do that they brought these weapons? Number 4, what happened next according to 26:56b? So 56b says, then all the disciples deserted him and fled. And you can write that out there. That is the fulfillment of what Jesus had just said was going to happen. This very night, you are all going to desert me. You are all going to fall away. And I don't know why it happened after Jesus went willingly, after Jesus told them that all of this is for the prophecy to be fulfilled. Maybe they had said, I'll die for you, because they thought they were going to get the chance to fight for him and die for him. And when he went willingly, they didn't know what to do. There was no fight. There's no ability to die for him. They're just in this position where he's gone and they're still here. What are they supposed to do? And I think because they didn't understand what Jesus was calling them to do, and they didn't listen enough to what Jesus was telling them all this time about what was going to happen, they thought all along that, Peter, maybe we criticize Peter for falling away, for his denial, but he's also the one he was ready to die for Jesus. At some level, he fought for Jesus. He attacked somebody with people with weapons all around him. And Jesus stopped it, because Jesus' will, at least at this moment, God's will was never that Jesus now die for him. Now, eventually that happens. But God's will was not that Peter die for him right now. But rather that Peter remain faithful and, by the way, not fall away and not deny him, so that he can become the leader of the fledgling church that he needs to be, that the world needs, so that they can proclaim the message of what Jesus has done. And so Peter was prepared to die, but not prepared to live, apparently, not prepared to do what he was supposed to be doing in life. And so I've always said that it's easier to say we would die for somebody than it is to live for somebody, because dying is sort of instantaneous. Living for somebody, it can be sometimes long and drawn out and just as painful as death, as we give our life moment by moment for somebody. Positive, encouraging. There you go. What happened next, according to 26:57 through 68? A, they took Jesus to Caiaphas, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. Yes. B, Peter followed at a distance right up to the courtyard of the high priest, where he sat down with the guards to see the outcome. Now, we're pretty critical of Peter, but he at least continued to follow at a distance. Where's everybody else? They all fell away, and here's Peter still somewhat close, trying to figure out what was going on. C, the chief priests and the Sanhedrin found people to provide false evidence against Jesus so that he could be put to death. They were looking for people. They found a lot of people, but none of it was significant enough to warrant death. And then these two guys came up and said this thing about the temple that Jesus had said. Now the high priest is angry. He stood and demanded an answer from Jesus, but he remained silent. And then finally told them, but from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven, which obviously the high priest interpreted as blasphemy. Jesus was condemned to death by the high priest for blasphemy, and the group began to spit on him, hit them with his fists, with their fists, hit him with their fists. I didn't put in here, and slap him and make fun of him. In other words, okay, so you're a prophet. Prophesy who hit you. Tell us who hit you. You're not a prophet. You can't even tell us who hit you, which direction it came from, because your eyes are closed and you're getting beat down, and people's fists are coming in from every direction. Number 6, meanwhile, what is happening in the courtyard according to 26:69 through 75? A servant girl came to Peter and said, "You were with Jesus of Galilee." And Peter denied it, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." B, Peter went out to the gateway, and another servant girl said the same thing, but Peter said, "I don't know the man." C, after a little while, those standing there said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." But Peter began to call down curses and swore to them, "I don't know the man." So I think in a different translation or at a different place, it says, his accent showed that he was from Galilee. Therefore, he was from the same area as Jesus. And why was he here in Jerusalem? And what was going on? And surely he was one that knows this guy, and that's why he's hanging around. D, immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. Now, we're going to progress in this story and kind of talk about the difference between how Judas responded to his betrayal and what Peter became and did. But Peter was sorrowful, clearly here. It tells us that he wept bitterly. So he was at a place where what Jesus said was true, and he had denied it and said, "This, I'll never do it." And then he realizes that he did. And I don't know if you've ever fallen and had been one that said, "No, I'm right with God. I'm never going to fall," and then all of a sudden realized that you had disappointed God. But that realization can make you sick to your stomach and break your heart. If it doesn't, then I question whether you were ever in relationship with Jesus to begin with. He's brokenhearted here and recognizes that as much as he talked a good game, as much as he presented himself as strong, he was not strong, and he fell. And Jesus knew it was going to happen all along.